Hello and welcome to my series about divine experiences, teachings of the saints, and stories of ascetics in the world. Now from the book Everyday Saints and Other Stories. Ilya Danilovich. The parish house of Father Raphael in the village of Lositsi was a simple one-room wooden cottage, but everything else about the place was extraordinary. On the stove there lived an incorrigible old geezer, crazy possessed Ilya Danilovich, a powerful old fellow who nonetheless almost never clambered down from the comfort of the stove. I never met anyone like Ilya Danilovich, either before or since. Whenever he would begin to tell a story, and it didn't matter whether it was about something that happened long ago or something that had just happened yesterday, his listeners would hear him out with rapture, understanding that they were in contact with something totally unique. Ilya Danilovich was gifted with a truly epic state of mind. In all the history of the world, perhaps only a few men who were ever so naturally endowed had epic storytelling: Homer, Tolstoy, and crazy Ilya Danilovich. He had a phenomenal memory. If he chanced to be relating something from his own military past, he would list the names of all the officers and all the soldiers, all their ranks, their dates of birth and dates of death, and their names of their wives and fiancés, and the names of their hometowns and villages. He could remember what weapons they fought with, whether it was a .375 caliber rifle or a howitzer. Ilya Danilovich described everything with no less fascination and loving detail than that with which the shield of Achilles was described in the Iliad. Ilya Danilovich had come to religion in a very peculiar way, and it was precisely due to his having been possessed. Because, as Father Raphael explained, without his possession, Ilya Danilovich would have stayed a handsome young cavalier who feared nothing in this world and lived entirely according to the laws of the flesh, and would never have come to God of his own free will. And the desires of the flesh, according to Ilya Danilovich, were so powerful that even leaving aside his amorous exploits, which were considerable, he was so moved by his senses that once in 1941, when he was standing sentry by the front line, he felt such a hunger that he followed the smell of beef stew all the way to the enemy's trenches. The Germans at first were stunned, but they didn't shoot. They decided to wait until this crazy Russian fell into their trench. And when they realized why the crazy lad had come, they gave him beef stew and oatmeal. And so not only did Ilya eat his fill, but even stuffed his helmet and pockets with oatmeal for his hungry comrades. Such incidents happen in the war, though they were rare. When he got back from the war, the brave soldier did not put off until tomorrow what he could do today, but immediately chose for himself the most beautiful woman to be his bride. But quite soon it emerged that this choice was flawed. His young wife's character, and particularly the character of his mother-in-law, were remarkably nasty. Ilya Danilovich was sad, but divorce in those days, and especially in workers' villages, was just not done. He quickly, however, found other ways to console himself. Ilya worked as a driver on long-distance journeys, and as he told me his story, he related with repentance that not only on his long-distance routes, but even in his own village, he soon had mistresses. His wife quickly found out about it. However, neither scandals nor pleading, nor scoldings from provincial Communist Party committees, nor the judgments of his comrades had any effect on Ilya in the least. At this point, his bitterly offended wife decided to take the most extreme measure. She went to a sorceress, and that witch, as they say among the people, sentenced or did Ilya to death. I remember myself how skeptically I listened to this portion of Ilya Danilovich's tale, but he didn't even bat an eyelid and kept on telling us what happened next. One evening, as he was returning home late from another one of his long-distance journeys, he approached the gate of his cottage and saw an unknown woman in his yard. What was most surprising about this woman was the fact that she was no less than 5 meters high. Her head could reach the roof. She was older than middle-aged and straight-haired with a very long braid, and dressed up in an old-fashioned sarafan peasant dress. This female giant paid no attention to Ilya, but paced around the house muttering something under her breath, and then effortlessly stepped over the picket fence and disappeared completely into the darkness. Ilya, like any normal Soviet person, had absolutely no belief whatsoever in mysticism. What's more, he was absolutely sober. Therefore, when his initial shock passed, he assumed that he had just been seeing things, being tired out from a long and arduous drive. As he walked into his house, he saw his wife and mother-in-law carefully fussing over a generously decorated dinner table. This struck him as very strange, since Ilya could never once remember having been the subject of such attention and devotion from these perpetually complaining and cantankerous women before. But they courteously sat him down, and his mother-in-law poured him some vodka, and an unprecedented feast began. Ilya remembered the unusual vision he had just seen in his yard, and he asked the woman if anything out of the ordinary had happened before he had arrived. The woman amiably scoffed, waved her arms, and assured him that nothing out of the ordinary had or possibly could have happened. The vodka flowed, even more abundant than before, and Ilya soon forgot about everything. He awoke early next morning in his bed. His wife was not next to him. Ilya decided that it was time to get up, but to his amazement, he was unable to do so. His hands and feet would not obey him. Terrified, he began to scream, but instead of a real scream, all he could manage was a weak groan. Within an hour, which seemed to Ilya a terrifying eternity, his wife and mother-in-law returned with yet another woman, who seemed remarkably like the woman whom he had seen yesterday in his garden, only now she was normal in height. They paid no attention whatsoever to Ilya's groans, but instead, unabashedly looking at him, wandered around him, muttering whispered incantations to each other. Then they left, and Ilya was once more all alone and helpless. Only later that evening did his wife return once more, only this time in the company of the local doctor. Ilya listened to her weeping in floods of crocodile tears, describing how her husband had returned home from his trip, had drunk way too much, had fallen asleep, and was now completely unable to get up. The next day they took away the patient to the regional hospital. He spent more than a month there, but the doctors could not figure out the cause of his strange ailment, and so they released Ilya, wizened and emaciated, and dried out like a wood chip, to die at home. At home, a real nightmare was waiting for him. His wife and mother-in-law did not even begin to conceal their victories, and joyfully awaited the death of the wayward husband who had wronged them. One time when Ilya was really feeling terrible, his wife even invited the coffin maker to their home, and helped him to measure her husband who, though unable to speak, was still breathing. Though not understanding what was happening to him, Ilya was reconciled to the thought of his impending death, and awaited his inevitable end almost meekly. But then Ilya's old friend, who had served with him in the war, found a moment when the women weren't home, and brought along a priest dressed in civilian clothes. He suggested that Ilya be baptized, even on his deathbed, and that he turn to God for help. Ilya was so sick that he barely understood what all of this meant, but with the only movement still left to him, a slight nod of the head, he expressed his agreement. After his baptism, no miracles occurred, except for the fact that despite all odds, and to the utter astonishment of the doctors, Ilya did not die. His wife and mother-in-law were beside themselves with rage. Nearly a month passed, after which Ilya with extreme difficulty was able to somewhat lift himself up from bed, and barely speak a few words. Otherwise his condition remained horrible. But when his friend, who had served with him on the front, came and collected Ilya, packed him up into a train, and brought him on slow trains to the entire country, changing trains in city after city, to Pskov cave monastery, to the elder Archimandrite Athenogenes, Ilya had come to a strange and unfamiliar world, unlike anything he had ever known. But after speaking to Father Athenogenes, after which he also followed up by his first confession and taking of communion, he was, so to speak, resurrected. Within 1 week Ilya was completely well, walking on his own 2 feet, and each day getting better and better. He had very much in common with the elder, Both of them were simple people of peasant origins. Therefore, when Father Athanasius told Ilya that his wife had had a spell cast on him, and that he, having no spiritual defense, should have actually died, Ilya believed him at once. Why shouldn't he have believed him, when the only one in this world who had been able to save him was this ancient monk? Ilya Danilovich never came home again. He became a holy pilgrim. From time to time he lived and worked in the monastery, and other times he wandered on foot through all of Russia, from church to church. It had been a long time since he had had an internal passport. Gradually he began to get older, yet he remained physically strong and healthy. He was in this state when I met him, living in Father Raphael's parish house. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for new episodes every Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday.